teachers to the one of managing pre-planned events. So it is claimed by Little John in Hutchinson and Torres in 1994 in the page of 316. And then a similar negative view emerged during a recent discussion of the role of textbooks on the internet from University of New York also claimed that textbooks are for poor teachers, those without imagination. And then the next is some materials fail to present appropriate language models. It, it is also claimed by Porter and Roberts in 1981 and Noonan in 1989. And then the next is some materials fail to contextualize language activities. There is also uh, claimed by uh, Krams in 1897. Oh, I mean in Auerbach and Burgess in 1985. And then some materials foster inadequate cultural understanding. It is also claimed by Krams in 1987. And then the last is some materials lack equity in gender representation that claims by Gracie in 1989. So Crawford in this part of her article that she mentioned or put the different concern views about using textbooks in the classroom. So in this section, like we questioning that do the pre-planned material can meet the needs of all students because all students have their own needs, have their own interests and learning motivation. So their learning needs, I mean, will be different. So because all humans are so unique, so their needs will be unique and different from others. So depending on this problem, if the teacher holds a class from a pre-planned book, then the students will lose motivation and it will hinder the learning environment. And because in second language acquisition process is different for learners, the entire learner cannot obtain something in a certain time. At least they need more or less time. For pre-planned materials, if the teacher intended to take the class with same materials without assessing the learner's need, then their purpose and outcome will not be up to the mark. And in this, uh, the next part of this article, however, on exact role of textbooks in the language classroom, here Albright in 1981 suggests that there are two key positions. The first is deficiency view. Textbooks compensate for teachers' deficiencies. So it says the role of textbooks or published material is to compensate for teacher and ensure that the syllabus is covered using well thought out the exercises. And then the second position is difference view. The materials are carriers of decisions best made by someone other than the teacher because of some differences. So it is on the other hand, is the materials as the best decision that made by someone other than the teacher because of the differences in expertise. So where teachers use published materials on the grounds that is better and less expensive. Less expensive in terms of cost and time. So it is important for material writers to be familiar with the teaching and learning styles. And yeah, in other words, teacher and their experiences have an important role to play in the production of the material as well as in their critical use of the classroom. And then the next is about positive point of view. The assumption seems to be that a teacher will slavishly follow the textbook and let it control the classroom and what occurs therein and fail to respond to learner feedback. So, however, there are several positive points of view which also claimed by the researchers. And in this section of the article, there are three positive points of view. First is assist and experienced teachers, and then agent for change, and then structuring tool. So the first is assist and experienced teachers. The teachers are very independent in using their textbooks, and only a minority of teachers follow the text in the page-by-page manner suggested in the literature. Appropriate textbooks can help inexperienced teachers understand the content and deal with this with different learners. Teacher guidance can help to learn to think pedagogically about specific content, taking into account the relationship between what teachers and students do and what students should learn. And Donahue in 1992, the page 35, extends this pedagogical role to textbooks from inexperienced teachers to experienced teachers. So his survey of 76 teachers show that most reported using teachers' guides at least once or twice a week, indicating their potential as an essential source of information and support and a medium for continuous professional development. And then the next is agent for change from the positive point of view. Um, Hans Hutchinson and Torres in 1994 also view textbooks as possible change agents. First is textbooks need to be a vehicle for training teachers and students. In other words, in addition to an explicit and detailed teacher's guide, the student book must also contain suggestions for the right way of learning. And then second is textbooks should provide support and assistance with classroom management, thereby freeing teachers to cope with new content and procedures. And the third, textbooks will become agents of change if they provide teachers with a clear picture of what change will look like and clear, practical guidance on implementing it in the classroom. And then the structuring tool. Another function of the textbooks that is often overlooked is its role as a structuring tool. Textbooks persist and thrive primarily because they are the most convenient means of providing the structure that learning process, especially systems under change, by Hutchinson and Torres in 1994 in the page 317. A textbook from this perspective doesn't immediately encourage the teaching process, but provides the structure and predictability needed to make the event socially tolerable for participants. It also serves as a helpful map or plan of what is intended and expected, thus allowing participants to see where a lesson fits into the language program's wider context. And then, yet, Hutchinson and Torres in 1994 suggest that this point is important because it allows for negotiation to provide something to negotiate about. The textbook can actually contribute by providing something to negotiate about. So this can include the teacher and learner roles as well as content and learning strategies. And then the second is accountability to show what is being done. The textbook shows all stakeholders what is being done in the classroom. And then the third is orientation to know what is happening. Uh, your teacher and learners need to know what is happening elsewhere, what standards are expected, how much work should be covered, and so on. And then the next part of this article is effective teaching materials. Um, in a language learning process, two components play the main role. The first one is a student and the other is a teacher. So the materials here is like a bridge them in some kind of like a tie. So a material has to be effective. So based on this, the author begins by pointing out eight essentials assumptions in teaching materials. So the first is language is functional and must be contextualized. Um, Language becomes what it is because of the purpose we put it, whether it's learner input or output. Language must emerge from the context in which the language occurs. So for that, the material must contextualize the language presented, because if we don't know what is going on, who the participants are, and the social psychological distance, it's impossible to understand the true meaning of the interaction. And then the second is language development requires learner engagement in purposeful use of language. So um, to engage learners more, like the audio video materials inclusion, it will make learners more interactive, so they feel interest, so choosing the video and audio materials with the cultural context by depending on the learner's background and also the learner's goals, so teacher can decide whether to enhance or to reduce this focus. And then the next is the language use should be realistic and authentic. So we have to make sure that language the learners are exposed to is authentic in the sense that it represents how the language is typically used. So if the language is uh, inauthentic because it has been written or reduced to exemplify a certain language, then the learners will not acquire the ability to use the language effectively. And then the next is classroom materials. We usually seek to include an audiovisual component. This I Yeah, this statement is true not only because we live in an increasingly multimedia world, but also because such materials can create a learning environment, especially in the linguistic and cultural information about the target language. So materials such as like videos and multimedia allow the teachers and students to explore the nonverbal and also cultural aspects of language and verbal, like intonation, gestures, uh, facial expression, and so on. Because uh, these are important communication channels. That not only help learners understand the verbal language they are dealing with, but are also the meaning system they use. And then the next is effective teaching materials foster learner autonomy. So his emphasis on giving exercise or activities by using like multimedia, if it can be done, then the student will move into a new situation and it creates learning environment. And then the next is materials need to be flexible enough to cater to individual and contextual differences. Here it is important for teachers to recognize the different backgrounds, like experiences and also learning styles that students bring to language classes, and also the impact these experiences. In other words, most students and not teachers control what is learned because they are the ones who selectively organize the input into a meaningful whole. And then the next is learning needs to engage learners both effectively and cognitively. So for learners to maximize their exposure to language use, they need to engage both effectively and cognitively in the language experience. So thinking while experiencing the language spoken helps uh, achieve the deep processing that require for effective and long-lasting learning. And also it helps the learner to like transfer the higher order skills such as like predicting, relating, interpreting, and so on. And then the the less is technologically complex world, second language learners need to develop the ability to deal with written as well as spoken genres. So, reading material usually needs to cover various genres, including in computer literacy. So, it will emerge from context and be accompanied by activities and exercises exploring its meaning in that context. And this reading material will provide uh, which to develop the familiarity with the structure of such a text and provide a scaffold to assist the learner's efforts to write a similar text. And then about the conclusion here, through this article, the author provides readers with an insight into how materials can meet the needs of the teaching process and how teachers can use or even adapt these resources and utilize them more effectively. The material provides input for specific linguistic and cultural preparations, but the main goal is to reach the language through the ultimate learning process. In a learner-centered classroom, the material should have more learning-centered activities. Students should have the opportunity to take part in these activities rather than the material being useful. So that's all from my presentation. Thank you for your attention. So thank you, sir. I will give it back to you.
Right, let's go with the next student. Anisia, I think, is already here. Anisia?
Hello, sir.
Yes, over to you,
Yes,
Anisia.
sir. Uh, Sir, I'm sorry. I'm begging your pardon, but I have technical issue over here, so my laptop just stuck and it suddenly just like die. So I just about to turn it on again. So may I request to be the last presenter, please, sir?
Okay, so Nurul, can you take over?
Yes, thank you, sir.
Right. So you can share your screen now, Nurul, and open your mic.
Okay.
Can you see my screen, everybody?
Your screen is visible. Go ahead.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, sir. And today I'm going to present about using corpora in the language classroom by Tolimson. I mean, Randy Repan and Tolimson books. This is the outline for my today's presentation. The first one is definition of corpus. The next one is advantage of using corpora in language classroom. The third is the way using corpora in language classroom, and the last one is conclusion. So, what is corpus? Basically, corpus is bank of authentic text collected in order to find out how language is actually used. So, in other words, corpus not only provide information about word meanings, but also provide important information about word use, like how the word used in a sentences or other form of sentences. A corpus is frequently limited to a certain sort of language usage, such as a corpus of newspaper English, a corpus of legal papers, or a corpus of informal spoken English, and it is typically kept and exits electronically. Since the mid-1990s, dictionaries based on corpora have been widespread in English as a second language classroom. Teachers have been more interested in using information from corpora to educate or produce language learning material as a natural extension of using corpora-based dictionaries. This phenomena has grown over time. and it has even spread to teachers who want to incorporate corpora in their into their classroom. Using corpora in the language classroom can give various benefit to both teacher and student. For the teacher, using corpora in language classroom can provide rich source of authentic material, such as example of the language student will encounter outside the language classroom, and then helping teachers plan what to teach and as a resource for developing teaching materials. Not only for the teacher, using corpora in language classroom can be benefit to the students, which is corporate and language classroom can provide students with many examples of the target features such as vocabulary item or grammatical structure. And then corpus can help students better understand the feature and its context of use. Um, the form of corpus usually can be in spoken or written discourse. The spoken texts are usually transcribed into a written version, and in most cases, the audio file are not available for the spoken one. So, according to Randy Reppen in Tolimson books, there are three ways of using corpus in language classroom. The first one is teacher can bring in material from corpus searchers and have students work with the teacher prepared material. Since in many classes or places may not have easy access to computers or not be able to access the computer lab during class time, a teacher can still use corpus activities without having computer available for a student by using this teacher prepare corpus materials like the example here. Uh, First activity that teacher can bring in a word frequency list with an activity by seeing the common verbs like the chart here. Um, the corpus materials provide common verb usage like say is common use rather than the other verb like mean, give, or want. The other activities is about word formation, but this is the case of graduate students. The teacher can give student a copy of a page from a textbook or a journal article, and then simply ask student to circle all of the nouns that they find with any of the six suffixes, maybe can list by the teacher, and then discuss the words like how words may change from nouns to verb when the suffixes are added, like the example here. Paint become painter, and then govern become government as a verb change to the noun. Okay. Teacher also can also use concordant output or keyword in a context like this figure to discuss how a word can belong to different parts of speech. For the example, both as a noun and a verb, and to help students see pattern they are associated with the different forms. As shown from the figure here, um, the teacher has grouped the target from show here, show by part of speech, noun, and verb, whereas a verb, show is often followed by that, like this. Or teacher could ask students to discover clues to help them to know that show is being used as a noun when it followed by an article. By first introducing students to this activity that are brought into the classroom, students will be less overwhelmed when interacting with Opera on their own. In addition, students will be practicing valuable analytical skills and will become familiar with the process for discovering pattern of language use that can help a student to become more autonomous learning language learners. This teacher prepared core content lines, allow teacher to check that the content is appropriate for their learners since the teacher search the content by their self for their learner. Okay, so this is the advantages of using teacher prepared corpus material. That a teacher can control the material since the teacher search the corpus for the student, like I said before, and then bring in those results. Teacher can make sure that the vocabulary load is not too great for the student and that students are exposed to the target form in a way that is meaningful and relevant for the students. And then the second way is using corpus in language classroom. Is teacher can use some of the online corpora that are available and friendly use by many users like a Coca, Time, My Case, and MIC-USP. But this way, the second way is just for teacher and student are fortunate enough to have access to computer, like access to online corpora or web corpora as a useful resource. For example here, by using the time corpus and Coca, this is the Coca or corpora looks like, which is a Coca is corpus of contemporary American English. Both were developed by Mark Davis and have the same user interface, and both these corpora can be useful for teaching. Among other uses, the COCA can be a useful tool for raising students' awareness of differences of language use in both speech and writing, while the time corpus can provide accessible example of writing. In addition to providing a keyword in context activity, the interface of these two corpora allows user to search the corpus specifying a part of speech. The bar display in COCA can be useful tool to raise learners' awareness of differences between forms that are frequently used in speech but not frequently used in writing, like the figure here. That show the result of search on the word get. Here, get. The bar graph provides students with a powerful visual that word get is frequently used in spoken form, like this one. Spoken is get in a spoken is more commonly used other than in a written form, like in fiction or magazine, in a magazine, in newspaper or academic writing. So the third, this is the other corpora looks like. This is the Time Magazine corpus, and then the next is for my case, which is Michigan Corpus of Academic Spoken English. So the third ways of using corpus in language classroom is teacher can bring in existing corpora or create specialized corpora for their class. For example, corpus from readings from student papers and have students interact with the corpora. For the example here, the example of a specialized class corpus is building a corpus of student papers. Teacher could use this class corpus to guide students in comparing features found in their writing with the feature found in the MIC-USP corpus. This is the MIC-USP corpus looks like. By filtering the searches in MIC-USP, the comparison between the student writing corpus and MIC-USP can be made even more meaningful by selecting the student level that matches the student in the class. So the conclusion for this part is that corpora are a rich source of information that reflects the real-world usage of language that students will experience outside of the classroom. Using corpora in the classroom is an excellent example of bringing authentic materials into lesson by the teacher, which was formerly considerably more difficult. But one concern will be the requirement to link student goals with the teaching resource, as well as the use suitable resources to achieve teaching and learning objective. Okay, thank you. That's all for me. I hope you guys get the point here. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Nurul. You actually presented in just 11 or 12 minutes. You still have like 8 to 15 minutes more. Do you want
Yes.
to add something to your presentation?
Actually, no, sir.
Okay, so should we move on to Anicia? Anicia,
Sir,
are you there?
oh, sir, I'm crying because it's still stuck, sir. It's been loading like 5 minutes. Probably will take some more minutes. I'm really sorry. But I'm trying to ask my friend so she can help me to share screen.
Yeah, so do you have your presentation file ready? If you have, you can send it
Yes,
over
sir.
so someone else can play
It's still,
the
but it's still
slide.
download. I'm really sorry for this inconvenience.
Okay, so while waiting for Anicia to solve her problem, perhaps I can share a bit about the presentation. It's better perhaps to share your presentation file to us slightly before the D-Day. So for instance, those who were presenting today should have shared their presentation file the day before, which was yesterday. So just go to Google Classroom. Here, this is Google Classroom. Meeting 10 is today. So next week we'll be meeting 11. Okay, so let me create a topic for meeting 11. There you go. Now create a material using which you can upload your presentation file. Creating the form now. Right, so what you need to do is write your name, student number, and submit your presentation file, and do it like one day before. So upload it on Wednesday, and next week. The one who should present is, let me just post this first. So next week, Stella, Sarfaraz, and Sadaf. So upload your presentation file on Wednesday, so we can prevent things like this from happening. So just in case you can only have voice connection without the ability to share screen, so you'll still be able to present, and I or some other colleague can control your presentation file. So let me check. There seems to be a chat. Right, it seems to be taking a while. Anicia, how long do you think it's going to take to resolve your problem?
Yes, sir. Yeah, yes, sir. It's still loading. Even it
Do
just
you
for
have your
download the
you have your
file,
presentation file
still
with you?
doesn't complete.
Anicia, do you have your
Yes, sir.
presentation file with you now?
It's in the laptop, so but right now I'm using phone.
Okay,
I'm trying
so
to.
right, so while waiting for Anicia to get her files, perhaps we can go to question and answer session for the two presenters. So feel free for any of you to ask questions to the two presenters who have presented their papers, not their papers, papers which I have asked them to present, Nurul and Francisca. You can either open your mic and shout, or you can write your questions in the chat room, just in case you have limited bandwidth to speak. Yes, we will do the attendance later. Yeah, I have marked the attendance. If you're observing carefully, I have marked all of you in for the last class. So yeah, you don't need to worry about that now. Let's focus on the question and answer session now, rather than worrying about your attendance, which is less important, okay? So feel free to ask questions. Okay, who is this? Sadaf. Sadaf, do you have any question to the two presenters or one of the presenters? Well, it's a bit quiet here. Let me break the silence. So if there is no question for the presenters, I will ask some questions or may request something. Okay, Francisca, are you here?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, great. So Francisca, you have presented a paper from Jane Crawford, the title of the raw materials in the language classroom. From your presentation, there are lots and lots of arguments put forth by Crawford or by other authors that she cited. However, I see that the arguments are lacking of real life examples, so that it might be difficult for the audience here to, how do I say, to get a real picture of the arguments. Can you give some examples deriving from each argument, or have one or two?
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Do you mean the argument for the negative points of view, or?
Oh, all of them, because you presented a lot of arguments, either from Jane Crawford herself or from other authors that she cited. Okay, but these arguments can be confusing as they are not supported by examples, or the examples are not shown in the presentation. So please provide some examples that correspond to some arguments that you have presented earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, in
It
this.
can be counter examples as well. So examples and counter examples that will make us understand better the argument.
So, in this topic, regarding the materials, so we know that materials are necessary to provide the input for the learners, not only the interest and motivate them, but yeah, it should also provide the examples of targeted language structures in a natural context. So all classes have material, whether it's a course book or an article clip from the newspaper, or it's independently generated. For example, like asking the students to tell stories or write letters. So
Francisca, sorry, I have to cut you here.
yeah.
So what I meant are real examples. Okay, so for instance, you mentioned something about the authentic and non-authentic materials. Yeah, the benefit of authentic materials, the pluses and their minuses. So can you give some examples of authentic teaching materials or non-authentic teaching materials? Then after that, you can explain more about the benefit of each and the minuses, perhaps, advantages and disadvantages.
Oh, okay. For the language use must be that the, I mean the essential materials that mentioned by the writer must be authentic and reflecting reality. So yeah, it for example, it can be for
Francisca, I think it's quicker for you to share your screen. Maybe you can Google, you can browse Google and show us which material is authentic, or maybe which material is not authentic.
oh okay, wait, sir.
Yeah. Okay, so I see that there is a message from Anicia. She says she's
Yes,
ready
sir.
for the presentation. So Francisca, can you hold in a bit, or you can take some times to get the materials from the internet. We will come back to you later. Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir.
So yeah, Anisia, over to you now.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So, okay, I'll share screen. Okay, I believe is it visible now, right?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so first of all, thank you so much for sir and friends understanding and patient. I'm so grateful and I really appreciate it. Okay, so I'll begin. Today I will present about principle and procedures of materials development. So actually this is the introduction of the overall the book is about to talk. So this book concerns with what we could do as a material developers in order to improve the quality of materials which are used for teaching and learning second language. And the first introduction. Okay, so this book is going to present ideas that should involve in materials development. The first one is to clarify the terms and concepts commonly used in discussing materials development. The second, carry out systematic evaluation of materials currently used in teaching and learning second language. Third, to consider the potential application for materials development of current research into the second language acquisition. Fourth, consider the potential application of what both the teachers and learners believe is valuable in teaching and learning second language. And the fifth, pool our resources and bring together researchers, writers, teachers, learners, and publishers in join in the efforts to develop quality materials. So this is these 5 ideas are going to elaborate more in next slides. Okay, the second is terms and concepts. The first one is materials. So the term materials here is used to refer to anything which is used by teachers or learners to facilitate the learning of a language, or in other words, they can learn from anything. For example, the materials it could be like DVDs, emails, YouTube, dictionary, even the food packages. So it's literally everything. And the second, materials development. So materials development is both a field of study and practical undertaking. As a field, it studies the principle and procedures of the design, and evaluation of language teaching materials. While as a practical undertaking is done by writers, teachers, or learners to provide sources of language input. And the third is materials evaluation. And this term refers to attempts to measure the value of material. And this is important because we are the materials developer can predict whether or not the materials will work, in sense that the learners can be able to use them without too much difficult, or will enjoy the experience of learning. The fourth, language teaching. The term teaching used to refer anything done by materials developers or teachers to facilitate the learning of the language. There are some types of teaching over here. The first one is direct teaching, transmit informally overtly to the learners. Indirect teaching helps the learners to discover teaching things for themselves. Preemptive teaching aims to prevent problems. Responsive teaching responds to need for language when it occurs. And remedial teaching aims to remedy problems. The fifth is language learning. Learning is normally considered to be a conscious process. which consists of the committing to memory of information relevant to what is being learned. But there is also argument that language learning also consists of subconscious development, because in overall, when we learn English, there is a time when our subconscious mind also help us to learn it. And also, there are kinds of language learning. The learners are aware of when and what they are learning. Second, implicit, the learners are not aware when what they are learning. Collective knowledge about the language systems, and procedural knowledge, how the language is used. The third is systematic evaluation of material. So most materials developers or teachers follow their intuition rather than an offered specification of objectives, principle, and procedure. Because this is actually based on their own experience, but it is also important and useful to have specification of objects, principle, and procedure rather than just based on intuitions. That's for systematic evaluation of material. And the third, second language acquisition research and materials development. So it's clear that researchers cannot present agree upon a of learning process, which can safely apply also to language teaching. So there should be like a compilation of principles and procedures, which most teachers need to contribute to a successful learning. So here are some basic principles of second language acquisition. The first one, learners are rich, meaningful, and comprehensible input of language in use. Second, learners may be engaged for effectively cognitively in language experience. Third, learners who achieve communicative competence than those who don't. Fourth, learners can benefit from using those mental resources, which they typically utilize when acquiring their first language. Fifth, learners can benefit from noticing salient features of the input from discovering how they are used. And the sixth, learners need opportunities to use language to try to achieve communicative purpose. But so there are other arguments to acquire second language. The first one is comprehensible input. I'm sorry. Okay, so it means the exposed language that we can understand. Second, output. So instead of input, we need also output, which is the situation in which we have to actually use the language. And the third best way to acquire language is to do as naturally without formal lessons or conscious study of the language. And the last, conscious attention to distinct features of the language is necessary for successful language learning. There are some of the basic principles of second language acquisition that relevant to the development of materials for teaching the languages. There are 6 points, and we are going to see them one by one. The first one is materials should achieve impact. Can achieve impact through the first one, novelty, such as unusual topic, and B, variety using many different text types. C, attractive presentation by use of attractive colors or a lot of white space and so on. The appealing content, for example, which offer the possibility of learning something new. And E, achievable and challenge the learners. The impact means that it should be the materials have a noticeable effect on learners. That is when the learners have curiosity, interest, and attention to learn these materials. And Oh yeah, there's additional explanation. An obvious point that impact is chief impacts with the class still might not temper the so what uh, so idea here is to maximize the chief impact. Materials development need to materials development need to know as much as possible about the learner and about what it is like to. And the second one, materials should help learners feel ideas. The researchers, a lot of research has shown various forms of acquisition is like the less anxious the learner, the language acquisition process. Similarly, relaxed and comfortable students apparently can be more in shorter period of time. So when learners learn a second language acquisition, learners should feel comfortable and relaxed. And materials can help learners to feel at ease in a number of ways. For example, most learners are more comfortable with written materials with lots of that they do with materials in which lots of different activities are crammed together at the same page. With the text and illustration, they can relate to their own culture. And the other example. The third, materials should help learners to develop confidence, which means that could be achieved by building confidence through activities which try to push learners slightly beyond their existing proficiency, engaging them in tasks which are problematic but which are able to. And it can also help them with the activities that encourage learners to use and to develop their existing extra linguistic skills. The fourth, what is being taught should be perceived by learners as relevant and useful. For example, over here, as ICP or English for Specific Purpose materials is relatively easy to convince the learners that the teaching points are relevant and useful by relating them to know learners' interests and the real life tasks, which is the learners need or might need to perform in the target language. While in general, English material, this is obviously more difficult, but it can be achieved by narrowing to the target readership or by researching what the target learners are interested in and what they really want to learn the language for. So we should know the target of the learners, then we can make it more relevant and useful to the target. I mean, like to the learners. The fifth, materials require and facilitate learners self-investment. So materials can help them to achieve this by providing them with choice of focus and activity, by giving them topic control and engaging them in learner center and discovery activities. Six, learners must be ready to acquire the points being taught. So they must always be ready. The readiness can be achieved by materials that create situation requiring the use of variational features not previously taught by materials that ensure the learners have gained sufficient mastery over the development features and so forth. So, and also it can be achieved by materials which the learners have to focus, it can be achieved by materials which get the learners to focus attention on features of the target language they have not yet acquired, so they might be more attentive to the features in the feature import. So I believe we can apply the Crescent's idea over here that input plus one, it should be like one step above than the previous stage. Yeah, things like that. The seventh, materials expose the learners to language authentic use. Materials can provide exposure to authentic input through the advice they give, the instruction for the activities, and the spoken or written text they include. They can also stimulate the exposure to authentic input through some activities, such as interviewing the teacher during the project local community. Or in order to facilitate acquisition, the input must be comprehensible, and it could be achieved by it could be achieved by doing some research to the learners and researchers. So this is the term of we as a materials developers. Hope it's clear. Okay. The eighth, the learner's attention should be drawn to linguistic features of the input. So it's helping the learners pay attention to linguistic features of authentic input can help them eventually acquire some of those features. The important thing is that the learners become aware of gap between particular features of their interlanguage and the equivalent feature in the target language, such as noticing the gap between output and input that can act as an acquisition facilitator. The ninth, materials should provide the learners with opportunities to use the target language to achieve communicative purpose. So it can be like using language for communication involves attempts to achieve purpose in a situation in which the content, strategies, and expression of the interaction are determined by learners. An interaction can be achieved through, for example, post-listening and post-reading activities, or that require learners to use information from the text. The 10th, materials should take into account that the positive effects of instruction are usually delayed. Acquisition results from the gradual and dynamic process of intergeneration rather than instant adjustment to the learner's internal grammar. Internal grammar. So this is it's equally important that the learners are not forced into premature production of the instructor features, and that the tests of proficiency are not conducted immediately after instruction. Eleven, materials should take into account that learners differ in learning style. So we all know that learners have different preferred learning styles. Hence, activities should be variable and should ideally cater for all learning styles. Here are some styles that we can use. For example, styles of learning which need to be catered for language materials. The first one is like visual, auditory, studial, experiential, analytic, global, independent, and dependent. Okay, first of all, before I continue, I like to apologize again for my presentation. The font probably is too small. I will repass that later, and yeah, I'm really sorry for that. And the 12, materials should take into account that learners differ in attitude. So obviously, there's no materials development can cater for all affective variables, but it is important for anybody who is writing learning materials to be aware of the inevitable attitudinal differences of the users of the materials. So there are some ways of doing this include providing choices of different types of text, providing choices of different types of activities, providing optional extra for the positive and motivated learners, and so on. The 13, materials should permit a silent period at the beginning of instruction. So it has been shown that it can be extremely valuable to delay second language speaking for the beginners of language until they have gained sufficient exposure to target language and sufficient confidence to understanding it. So we shouldn't force them. And this silent period can facilitate the development of effective internalized grammar, which can help the learners to achieve proficiency when they eventually start to speak in second language. The important point is that materials should not force premature speaking in the target language, and they should not force the silent either. Fourteen, materials should maximize learning potential by encouraging intellectual, aesthetic, and emotional involvement, which stimulates both right and left brain activities. So there should be like a varied series of activities, for example, like analytic, creative, evaluative, and rehearsal demands on processing capacities can lead to deeper and more durable learning. Sorry. Okay. The fifth, 15. Materials should not rely too much on the control practice. Yet, the control still need, for example, in grammar practice activities. There's specifically in a dialogue practice. That's 16. Materials should provide opportunities of outcome feedback. Feedback which is focused first in the effectiveness of outcome rather than just accuracy of the output can lead to output becoming a profitable source of input. So instead of just give score, we can just like add some comments. So that's the meaning of feedback over here, I believe so. And 5. So before are 4 and now 5. What teachers and learners believe and want. So the material should adjust to the what teachers and learners believe or their goals. Even somehow it it contradicts the finding of SLA researchers. 6, collaboration. So in making the materials, it's will be better if we collaborate with some experts, for example, with the publisher, with the university lecturers, researchers, examiners, and so on. So after all, it can produce some more useful and productive materials. And the last one, new direction of materials development. The most obvious one is that increase in quality and quantity and quality of language learning materials delivered through new technology. So we can use some platforms such as YouTube or Facebook or even blogs to deliver materials. So it can be like a more interesting and also, up to date. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. Again, I'm really sorry, and please, if any question, comments, whatever it is, I will very welcome to hear it from you. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Thank you for Initia. Now let's get back to Francisca. Yeah, Francisca, are you ready?
Yeah, hello, sir.
Yes, you can share your screen and show some real-life examples from one or two of the arguments you have presented.
Okay, sir. Can you see my screen, sir?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, this is the one of example of the authentic materials like magazines. So many English language magazines have their digital version that can be accessed online. So this is one of the what we call the online webs. So depending on what topics that we want to write, from like animals or the arts, food, or maybe for the it can be also from the newspaper, online newspaper. It can be a useful source uh, uh, of a text on a variety of topics. So we can also visit the site like world newspapers, and yeah, to find the materials that suited to both uh, for the English, such as the like New York Times. And then yeah, for the non I mean the in authentic materials that I uh, mentioned before, it it refers to anything that has been designed specifically to aid the teaching process, such as like textbooks or worksheets, and yeah, instructional CDs or DVDs. So for example, the teacher asks the learners to reading some texts. So yeah, it can be hardly for the students to be a good reader because they would not be acquiring the real language. So the students maybe will be bored with the same reading text. They are distracting them, and yeah, passive.
Yeah, thank you, Francisca. So the thing is that Francisca's paper, not Francisca's paper, that the paper that Francisca presented earlier was very conceptual. So it has a lot of concepts to describe. However, what's lacking from the paper are real life examples. So this is where you can fill the gap. So if you have to present a paper where there are lots and lots of conceptual details, whose ideas are still very, very abstract. Well, ideas are abstract anyway, but you can operationalize this. Yeah, you can make this more concrete by corresponding these abstract ideas to real life representations of those ideas. Yeah. So one of the examples that I have asked Francisca to present is real life examples of authentic materials. Yeah. And then she mentioned examples from magazines of New York. I forgot the New York Times. What was the? Where did the magazine? What was the brand of the magazine?
Oh,
Was it
let's
New York
see.
Times or I cannot really recall.
Worldnewspaper.com.
Say again.
Worldnewspaper.com.
Yeah. So who produced that newspaper or who produced that magazine?
Yeah, it is. I think it's a websites.
Website. Okay. So actually, what you could have done more, Francisca, is by establishing how this material is authentic. Like, for instance, who wrote that newspaper? Okay. And in what ways it can be used as teaching materials. So that will put ideas that you just presented earlier to be more concrete. Yeah, so that's my response to your presentation. And now let's go to the second presentation by Nurul. Yeah, so Nurul, are you still here?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so anyone have questions for Nurul or responses to her presentation? No one? Okay, so unlike Nurul, unlike Francisca, the paper that Nurul presented has some real life implementation, but unfortunately, we don't get to see it working. So what Nurul has done is presented exactly what's inside the book. However, as the book, no, not the book, as the paper presents some tools and data, it will be better to give some real demonstration. So Nurul, can you demonstrate a little bit on how to use Corpora and how to access, and how to query Corpora, one of the Corpora, not all of them. that you have just presented. You
Okay,
can
sir.
share your screen.
But unfortunately, this is the first time for me to see the corporate itself, so I have
Okay,
no
so
idea.
I will guide you from here. Nurul, just share your screen.
Yes, sir. Just a minute.
So when you present a paper and there are things that you don't really understand, but you have to present, it's better for you to seek understandings of those concepts before you present. So before people give you questions, you are ready to answer. Yeah. So this would not happen if you present on real life conference. So your audience expects you to be ready to take questions and to provide answers and response to their comments. So choose one of the corpora that you have presented.
Coca, maybe, sir.
Okay. Now go to google.com and write Coca corpus. Corpus, yes. Okay, click on it. Right, can you find the description of the corpus?
Sorry, sir.
Can you find the description of the data in the corpus? What the corpus is about?
Oh, no, sir.
It's right there
Oh,
on the right
it's the
side.
corpus of contemporary. Yes, 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 sir.
Yeah, second paragraph.
Yes.
Can you read it?
This?
Yes.
Okay. The corpus contains more than 1 billion words of text. 20, maybe it contains 25 million words each year from 1990s until 2019 from 8 genres like spoken fiction, popular magazines, newspaper, academic text, and and a, and a TV and movie subtitles, blogs, and other web pages.
Right. So a corpus is a database of samples of language. Okay. And these samples are taken from different genres or domains, as Nurul has already just mentioned. Just wait for you. Now, Nurul, go back to your presentation on the slide in which you present findings from COCA.
Okay, sir. Here, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Can you explain more about that? What word was search? What is the focus of the search of that that corpus?
The focus word is here is get.
Say again.
Get word
Get.
get.
Okay.
Yes.
Now go back to COCA. Yeah. And on in the box, write get. Okay. On sections.
Oops.
Click on sections.
Sections. Yes.
Yeah. Click on sections. Okay. Now go down. Go down. Okay, that's all. Yeah. Okay, that's it. Yeah. Tick sections. Yeah. Go to chart.
Chart.
Next to list. next to list.
Next to?
List.
Next to list.
Under search.
Yes,
that's it.
Sorry, sir.
Okay. See frequency by section.
I think we have to register first, sir. like login.
Yeah, so that's why this kind of thing should have been done earlier.
Yes.
So when the audience asks you how to operationalize that tool, then you are ready. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So I'm going to share my screen now and we'll show you how it works. Okay, so I'm in Coca now, already logged in. Yeah, this is the search word. Yeah, and I take chart. Yeah, see frequency by section, and I'll try to replicate what's presented there. If you see the interface is slightly different because this is the new interface. Okay, but you can see here this is blog, web, TV, spoken, fiction, magazine, news, and academic. So just by looking at the visualization here on the bar chart, you can see that the highest frequency of the word cat is under TV or media here. Yeah. So it's very easy to get that. Yeah. With this tool, you can even use another search word. So for instance, let's say research. Okay, now have a look at the bar chart. The highest frequency is under the academic section. So that means research is most frequently used in the academic section. Yeah. And then you need to relate this finding on how to create good language teaching materials. So don't just present what's there, correspond to real life examples and your own ideas. In that way, you can deliver the ideas better to the audience. Okay, that's about it. Any question for Anicia, the only presenters left? No question for Anicia? Well, my response to Anicia's presentation is very much the same like Francisca. So the paper that Anicia presented is very conceptual, but lacking of real life examples. Okay, so what you need to do is to correspond the content or some of the content, if you cannot correspond all, just some of the contents of the papers that you just presented, and they give examples and, if possible, counter examples. So, for instance, there are some principles proposed by Brian Tomlinson, the author of that paper, yeah, about how to create good language learning materials. Materials should have impact, materials should have learners feel at ease, materials should help learners to develop confidence. So there are 16 materials. If you just explain these 16 materials using the same words, yeah, like what you have just read, then the audience will be bored. Yeah, they will not get anything unless they already know. So in this case, perhaps if there are too many principles that you need to describe, okay, just choose 2 or 3. Yeah, focus on that. Get your audience connected to real life examples, okay, or counter examples that is lacking in that papers. In this way, you can get connected better to the audience. And if they still have questions, yeah, perhaps you can cover that. If there are still materials that you have not yet covered, you can always do that in question and answer session. Right, so little bit over the time due to some technical issues one of your friends had. Yeah, we are at the end of the session, and as I promised, let's do the questions list. Yeah, I think all of you are present here, so let me just make sure. Anisha here, Sarfaraz here, Sadaf here, Stella here, and Nan is also here. Hand is here, Noro is here, Francisca is also here. Right, I have marked all of you in. Everybody happy? Any question?
No, sir.
No, sir. Thank you
Right.
so much.
Okay. Yeah, as there are 2 cycles of presentation, try to do better in the next presentation. And then this is a very basic presentation technique, actually. So you need to master the materials before you present it, not just summarize it. Yeah, so that's what distinguishes you from high school students or undergrads. Yeah, you don't just summarize, you extract and analyze, yeah, and demonstrate. Okay, so giving a little bit of real life demonstration, like how to use Corpus tools, is can be beneficial. Yeah, so much beneficial for the audience because not everyone here is aware what a corpus is. But if they get like a practical experience, yeah, that can be impactful. Right. So over the time, 1643, you can leave. Yeah, I will see you in the next session next week. Yeah, don't forget for those who will present next week,